The thing nobody tells you about being betrayed by an avoidant is that the hardest part comes after the silence sets in. Not during the argument, not even during the moment it ended, after. When the noise stops and you're left trying to make sense of something that refuses to make sense. You gave something real. You know you did. And somewhere inside you, underneath the grief and the questions and the strange, still hours of the night, there's something else sitting quietly. Not just pain. Something older than pain. A need that feels almost embarrassing to admit. The need to know that what happened to you is not the final word. That the person who walked away carrying none of the weight is not actually carrying none of the weight. That need is not weakness. It is not bitterness dressed up in something more acceptable. It is the part of you that understands, at a level deeper than words, that there are consequences to the way people treat the ones who love them. And it is asking you to trust something that is very hard to trust when the evidence in front of you seems to say otherwise. Because they look fine. That's the part that keeps breaking you open again. They look completely fine. Here is what you need to understand about that. The capacity to appear fine is not the same as being fine. In the avoidant, specifically, it is not even close to the same thing. The appearance of fine is a skill. It was built over years, probably decades, in environments where showing need or hurt was either dangerous or pointless, where the emotional display system got quietly rewired to produce calm on the surface regardless of what was happening underneath. What you are watching when you watch them function normally is not the absence of consequence. It is the architecture of someone who has been managing their inner world from the outside in for so long that they no longer have reliable access to what is actually happening inside them. Karma, in the truest sense, is not something that arrives from outside. It is not a cosmic ledger with a balancing mechanism. It is the inevitable consequence of the internal structure a person refuses to examine. And the avoidant who betrayed you is living inside a structure that is quietly, steadily consuming the very things they will eventually discover they needed most. The first sign is not visible in the dramatic sense. It will not show up in a moment you can point to. It lives in the quality of their movement through the world after you. And the quality of that movement, if you know what you're looking for, tells you everything. Avoidants move toward new things with a particular kind of energy, a brightness, an urgency that reads like excitement, but runs on something else, something pressurized. When they leave a relationship, especially one that was beginning to require real vulnerability, the psychological system that governs their attachment does not simply reset. It does not go quiet. It transfers. The anxiety that was building inside the relationship does not dissolve with the leaving. It gets redirected into the next available object, a new person, a new pursuit, a new version of the story where they are not someone who ran, they are someone who moved on. Watch the pace of that movement. When someone is processing a genuine ending, when they have metabolized the loss and moved forward from a place of completion, there is a quality of groundedness in how they step into what is next. A slowness, not depression, just weight. The weight of something real having ended. That is not what you see in the avoidant who left you. What you see is acceleration. An acceleration that looks like freedom is, in the psychology of the avoidant, almost always displacement. The psychological term is deactivating strategy, the mechanism their nervous system uses to suppress attachment feelings that have become threatening. New pursuit, new focus, new person. These are not signs of someone who is healed. They are signs of someone who is running and has not yet noticed that running is what they are doing. Here is the consequence hidden inside that pattern. The new situation begins to carry the same weight the last one did, because they have not changed, because the wound that drove the pattern is still intact, still unnamed, still organizing their responses from underneath every interaction they have. And when closeness builds again, and it will build again, because the attachment system does not stop wanting what it wants, the panic returns. The pull to disappear returns. The impulse to create conditions that make leaving feel justified returns. They will do to someone else what they did to you, not because they are malicious, because they are unchanged. And each repetition of that cycle does something to their inner world that is the opposite of liberation. It confirms the story. It adds another layer of evidence to the narrative that says closeness is dangerous and distance is the only safe place to exist. They are not escaping. They are building a case against their own healing with every person they leave. You are not in that cycle. They are. And that difference, even if it does not feel like it yet, is the beginning of something. There is a particular quality to the avoidance restlessness that is worth understanding more precisely, because it is not random. It is not simply a personality trait that manifests as being easily bored or easily distracted. It is the signal of an unprocessed rupture moving through a system that does not know how to metabolize it. When something real ends, and the person at the center of that ending has not allowed themselves to grieve it, the unprocessed grief does not disappear. It becomes a kind of pressure in the system, and pressure seeks release. It finds its way into the quality of attention they can offer the next person, into a particular hunger that runs just beneath the surface of the new connection, something that the next person will feel without necessarily being able to name, a quality of being reached for but not quite touched, of being close to something but feeling a pane of glass between you and it. The avoidant is reaching for what they destroyed, not consciously, not in a way they would acknowledge, but the attachment system is not interested in what is acknowledged. It is interested in what was real, and what was real is you, and the reaching will continue, in one form or another, for as long as the loss remains unprocessed, which, in the avoidant who has no intention of processing it, may be for a very long time. There is a second thing happening in them simultaneously. It is quieter than the first. It is more internal, and it is arguably the more significant consequence. Avoidants regulate their emotional world through control. Not the kind of control that looks like dominance over others, though sometimes it presents that way. The control of closeness. They decide the distance. They decide when to let someone in, and how far, and for how long. They decide when it is over. This is not a conscious strategy. It is the architecture of an attachment system that learned early that other people are not reliably safe. That need is a vulnerability, and that the only protection available is the ability to be the one who leaves before being left. When they betray someone, the control feels intact. They made the move. They set the terms. Everything ran according to the pattern. And in the immediate aftermath, there is something that functions like relief. The threat of real intimacy has been neutralized. The proximity alarm in their nervous system has been answered. For a while, sometimes a significant while, this feels like peace. But the avoidant does not stop wanting connection by refusing to stay in it. This is the central contradiction of avoidant attachment. The deactivation system suppresses attachment feelings, but does not eliminate them. Underneath the managed surface, underneath the story they are telling themselves about why leaving was necessary and right, the attachment persists. And when the initial relief begins to thin, and it always does, what remains is a craving with no clean object. They think about you, not in the way they would articulate, not in a way that feels to them like missing you, in the way that an absence creates a specific shape that nothing else fills. They reach without realizing they are reaching for something that is no longer there, and the defensive structure intercepts that reaching before it can become conscious, rationalizes, reconstructs, rebuilds the version of the story where they were justified, where you were the problem, where leaving was the only rational response. But here is what that reconstruction is. It is labor, constant, effortful, invisible labor. Maintaining a false narrative requires ongoing work. The story has to be refreshed. The justification has to be reinforced. Every time something authentic tries to surface, a genuine feeling, a genuine memory, a genuine moment of reckoning, it has to be managed back down, suppressed, redirected, covered. You do not have to maintain anything. Your story is just the truth, and truth requires no maintenance. There is something else that lives inside this second sign, something about the nature of what the avoidant is protecting and what that protection is costing them at a level they have not yet been willing to calculate. The avoidant's control of closeness is not simply a preference. It is a load-bearing wall in the structure of their entire identity. Remove it, genuinely remove it, through the work of confronting the wound that built it. And what follows is not just discomfort. It is a reorganization of the self that they have never been willing to undergo, because that reorganization would require them to feel, perhaps for the first time with full exposure, the original hurt. The moment or the accumulation of moments that taught them that need was dangerous. That closeness was a precursor to loss. That the safest thing they could do was to ensure they were always the one holding the door. Holding that door forever is exhausting in a way that compounds invisibly. It requires a constant vigilance, a perpetual monitoring of the distance, a chronic underlying alertness that looks, from the outside, like self-possession, and feels, from the inside, like a low-grade tension that never fully resolves. They do not get to rest in the way that people who can genuinely receive another person get to rest. Connection, for the avoidant who has not healed, is never the place where the vigilance drops. It is one more environment that requires management. You got to love someone without that kind of management. That is not nothing. That is, in fact, a significant kind of freedom that they are currently unable to access. The cost of their maintenance accumulates. It is not dramatic. It is not the kind of suffering that announces itself. It is a slow, steady depletion of the emotional energy that could have gone toward actually living, toward being present, toward building something real. Instead, it goes toward the management of a wound they have decided, not once, but every single day, not to examine. That depletion is real. It is ongoing, and it will compound. You deserve to hear something directly and clearly, because there is a particular kind of pain that comes with being betrayed by someone who seems to have moved through it without consequence. And this pain has a specific quality that ordinary heartbreak does not carry. It makes you feel erased. That is the word for it. Not just hurt, erased. Like the thing you shared, the realness of what you built with another person has been quietly deleted from the record. Like your suffering is invisible, while theirs appears non-existent. And when you feel erased, the mind goes somewhere difficult. It starts asking whether any of it was real, whether you meant anything, whether your read of the situation was accurate, or whether you were the only one who felt what you thought you both felt. You were not wrong. What you felt was real. What you sensed between you was real. The avoidance capacity for feeling is not absent. It is defended, and defended is not the same as absent. The warmth you experienced from them was genuine. The moments of connection were genuine. What is not genuine is the story they are now telling themselves about why it had to end the way it did. You are not confused because you are weak or naive, or because you misread the signals. You are confused because you were given something real, and then watched the person who gave it to you behave as though it never existed. That is not a failure of your perception. That is an accurate reading of a genuinely contradictory situation. And holding that contradiction without collapsing it into a simple story, without making yourself wrong in order to make them make sense, is one of the harder things a person can do. The third sign is the one that requires the longest view, and it is the one that carries the most permanent consequence: intimacy. Not the performance of it, not the closeness that lives at the surface of a new connection before the real weight of another person becomes apparent. True intimacy, the kind that requires being seen, being known, having the full picture of who you are, be present to another person, and having them stay anyway. This is what the avoidant is slowly, incrementally losing access to, not suddenly, not in a way that is visible from the outside, but with every cycle of connection and withdrawal, with every relationship entered and destroyed, the capacity for genuine intimacy narrows. The defenses become more sophisticated. The stories become more entrenched. The fear puts down deeper roots and becomes harder to distinguish from personality, from preference, from simply being the kind of person who values independence. Avoidants need connection. This point is critical, and it is consistently misunderstood. The avoidance is not a sign of not needing. It is the sign of needing so intensely and being so terrified of that need that the entire psychological system has reorganized itself around never fully admitting it. The hunger is there. It has always been there. What the avoidant has done is build an elaborate structure of self-protection around that hunger so that it cannot be clearly seen, not by others, and eventually not even by themselves. What that looks like across the span of a life is a person who can get close to the surface of real intimacy, who can feel the warmth of it from a short distance, who enters relationships with genuine feeling and genuine desire, but who cannot stay when the closeness becomes real and full and requiring, who finds or creates reasons to leave just before the depth becomes undeniable, and who experiences this not as a choice they are making, but as an inevitability, as proof that something about closeness is inherently unsafe, as confirmation of the story that started the whole architecture in the first place. Every person they betray becomes evidence for the story that keeps them sick. Every departure feels to them like survival rather than loss. And the tragedy, the deep, genuine tragedy of the avoidant, is that they are not wrong, that they are surviving. They are just wrong about what they are surviving from. They are surviving from the thing they most need, and they are doing it so skillfully, so consistently, so automatically, that they may never stop long enough to notice that the threat they are fleeing is not external. It has never been external. The danger was never you. The danger is the wound inside them that they will not look at. Here is something the avoidant carries that most people on the outside never see. Something that is present in the quiet moments, in the spaces between the distractions and the new pursuits and the maintained surface of someone who is fine. The deactivation system that governs their attachment does not operate at the speed of a decision. It operates on a delay with attachments that were real. In the immediate aftermath of leaving, the system is working as designed. The feelings are muted. The relief is present. The narrative is intact and functioning. Everything appears calibrated, but real attachment does not deactivate on command. It processes on its own timeline, at its own depth, underneath the surface of the composed presentation. And weeks later, months later, sometimes significantly longer, something begins to break through. Not in a way they necessarily recognize as grief, not as a clean emotional event they can name and address, as a quality of restlessness that does not respond to the usual remedies, as an irritability with the new situation that should feel like freedom but carries a vague, persistent flatness, as a thought arising without invitation of you. And here is where the consequence becomes most visible, even if only they can see it, because the avoidant cannot simply feel that feeling. To feel it would require acknowledging the attachment. To acknowledge the attachment would require acknowledging the loss. To acknowledge the loss would require confronting the role they played in creating it. And that sequence of acknowledgements leads directly to the place they have organized their entire psychological life around never reaching. Accountability for the wound they carry. Responsibility for the wounds they have created. So the thought gets suppressed, the feeling gets managed, the memory gets pushed back under the surface. And in that pushing, something of their emotional aliveness goes with it. Not all at once, a small amount each time, but it is cumulative. And the cumulative effect of a lifetime of suppressing what is real in order to protect what is defended is a progressive narrowing of the inner world, a smaller range of feeling, a reduced capacity for presence, a life that functions, sometimes admirably, but that never quite reaches the depth it was capable of. They are paying for what they did. Not in the way that satisfies the part of you that wants a clear accounting, but in the currency that matters most, which is the currency of their own experience of being alive. What karma looks like in the life of an avoidant is not dramatic. It does not arrive in a recognizable form. It is the slow erosion of access to the things that make a life feel like it is being fully inhabited. The progressive loss of the ability to be truly known by another person. The strange hollowness that accumulates in the space where real connection would have lived. The recurring sensation that something important is missing without the willingness to identify what it is or how it got that way. The avoidant who betrayed you may never consciously understand why the things they accumulate keep failing to satisfy the specific shape of what they walked away from. Why the new relationships, the new energy, the new versions of themselves they construct in the aftermath of each leaving carry a ceiling that the previous one also carried. Why they keep arriving at the same point, the point where something is required of them that they cannot give, and finding the same exit, because what they walked away from was not just you. This is the thing that is most important to understand. They walked away from the version of themselves that was beginning to emerge in contact with you, the part that was getting close enough to real vulnerability to become someone who had done the work, someone who could stay. And they destroyed not just the relationship, but the possibility, the specific, irretrievable possibility of who they could have been if they had made a different choice at that moment. The consequence lives in the permanent incompletion of that potential, in every future moment that would have been different if they had chosen differently. That is not visible from the outside. It may not even be fully visible to them, but it shapes the contour of their experience in every quiet moment, in every unguarded second before the performance reassembles itself, in the small hours when the architecture of self-protection is not quite thick enough to cover what is underneath it. The psychology of being betrayed by an avoidant is specific in a way that ordinary heartbreak is not, and naming that specificity matters. Ordinary heartbreak has a narrative logic. The love faded, or the circumstances changed, or the incompatibility became undeniable. The story hurts, but it coheres. You can follow the line from beginning to end and find something that resembles sense. Being betrayed by an avoidant does not cohere. The connection was real. You felt it with the precision that people feel real things. They felt it too. This is almost certainly true, and the certainty of it is part of what makes the confusion so consuming. The warmth was genuine. The moments where they were present, fully present, were not constructed. And then something happened that seemed to exist in direct contradiction to everything that came before it. The withdrawal, the rewriting, the departure that treated the whole of what you built together as something that could be set down and walked away from. Two things that are both real and directly contradictory, that is what you are holding. And the mind, which is designed to resolve contradiction rather than tolerate it, will keep working on this problem long past the point where the working is useful. It will keep trying to find the explanation that makes both things true at once, that makes the warmth and the betrayal part of the same coherent story. The explanation exists, but it does not satisfy in the way you need it to. The explanation is that both things are true. The connection was real, and the avoidance capacity to stay in it was limited by a wound so old and so defended that it operated beneath the level of conscious choice. They were not pretending when they were present. They were not deceiving you when they let you in. They were, in those moments, giving you everything their system currently allowed them to give. And then, the system hit its threshold. And what happened next was not a decision made from the same place the connection was made from. It was a panic response, a defense activation, a flight from the very thing they had just been present for. That does not make it acceptable. It does not reduce the injury. What it does is return the meaning of it to you. The connection was real. Your read of it was accurate. What failed was not your perception or your worth. What failed was their capacity, and capacity is theirs to build or to leave unbuilt. That is a choice they make or refuse to make every day. What you are really asking when you need to know whether karma has reached them is not the question of punishment, not truly. What you are asking is whether the asymmetry of this situation is permanent, whether you are the only one who had to pay the full cost of what happened between you, whether the suffering you are carrying is something that falls entirely on your side of this. It does not. The cost is distributed, the distribution is just invisible, and the visibility of the cost matters to you enormously right now, which is completely understandable. But the invisibility of their consequences does not mean the consequences are absent. It means they are internal. And internal consequences, in the psychology of the avoidant, are in many ways more total than anything that could arrive from outside. Every relationship they cannot sustain. Every moment of genuine closeness that reaches a ceiling and goes no further. Every version of connection that begins with real feeling and ends with them engineered their own departure. Every time the restlessness returns and the new thing stops working and the quiet hours bring thoughts they refuse to follow to their natural conclusion. This is the cost. It is ongoing. It is compounding. And it will continue compounding for as long as they continue refusing to do the one thing that could stop it. You have something they do not have right now. The willingness to feel what is real, to turn toward the hurt rather than away from it, to let the grief move through you rather than rerouting it into something more manageable. That willingness is not comfortable. It is not something that makes the immediate experience easier, but it is the only thing that actually completes the process. The only thing that allows you to arrive on the other side of this as someone more whole rather than someone more defended. You are capable of that. You are already doing it. The fact that this is painful means you are not running from it. That is not weakness. That is the thing they cannot do. There is one more thing worth naming before this ends, because there is a temptation when you are in this place to monitor them, to watch for the evidence that they are not fine, to track the signs that the consequences are arriving, and it is worth understanding what that monitoring costs you and what it does not give you. Watching for their consequences keeps your attention tethered to them at the exact moment when the most important work happening is your own. The quality of their experience is not within your ability to influence or to verify. Their internal world is theirs, and the consequences of who they are and how they have lived are running regardless of whether you are watching. They do not require your witness to occur. Your healing, though, that requires your full attention. Not your attention split between your own process and the monitoring of theirs. Yours, completely. The grief that wants to move through you is asking for your presence, not your analysis of them, not your vigilance about whether the universe is balancing its accounts correctly. Your presence to the specific, irreplaceable, non-transferable experience of being you, moving through something that changed you, and finding out who you are on the other side of it. The avoidant who betrayed you will carry the weight of their pattern wherever they go. That is already decided. What is not yet decided is where you arrive when this is done, and that destination is entirely yours to determine. You are not the one who is running. You never were. And if there is one thing worth holding on to as you move through this, one piece of understanding that cuts through the noise of everything you have been carrying, it is this. The avoidant who betrayed you is not free. The distance they have put between themselves and what happened between you is not peace. It is the closest approximation of peace their current architecture is capable of producing. And there is a profound difference between those two things. Between the peace that comes from having genuinely processed something and the stillness that comes from having buried it efficiently. One of those states moves, it opens, it makes room for what comes next. The other one holds everything exactly where it is, preserved, intact, unchanged. And unchanged is the one thing a wound that has never been looked at will remain until the person carrying it decides, finally, that the cost of not looking is higher than the cost of looking. That decision is theirs. It may come, it may not. Either way, it is entirely outside your jurisdiction, and the sooner you let it be outside your jurisdiction, the sooner your full attention returns to the only story that is actually yours to write. There is something that happens to people who have been through exactly what you have been through, something that does not get talked about enough, a specific kind of clarity that begins to develop on the other side of this kind of pain, a precision in understanding what is real and what is defended, what is presence and what is performance, what is love and what is a person giving you everything their wound will currently allow. That clarity is not a consolation prize. It is not something that makes the cost of this worth it in any clean transactional sense. But it is real. It is a form of knowledge that only comes from having navigated something that required everything you had. And what you do with that knowledge, how you let it change the way you move through the world, the way you recognize what is genuine, the way you offer yourself to connections that are capable of meeting you. That is the part of this story that is entirely yours. The avoidant gets to carry their wound forward unchanged into a future that will keep reflecting that wound back to them in every relationship that cannot quite reach what they needed it to reach. You get to carry your clarity forward into something that does not yet have a shape, but is being built from the truest version of what you know about yourself and what you are willing to accept. That is not a small thing. That is, in the end, everything.